Dentistry in General Radio Network presents DIG's official podcast with Dr. Bob D.
Today's episode is brought to you by All Practice Solutions, your go-to dealer for large and small dental equipment. Whether you're upgrading your CBCT, replacing a chair, or getting a new vacuum, these guys have you covered. Mention DIG Podcast for an exclusive deal. $500 off CBCTs, $250 off chairs, compressors, and vacuums, plus $100 off handheld X-ray generators and sensors. Visit allpracticesolutions.com to learn more or contact Rod at 630-440-0600.
In this episode,
have you ever had a phone call like that where you knew what was next was not going to be good? This is one of those calls. And my wife, who was calling, opened by saying, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Do I need to be sitting down, Debbie?" And she said, "You absolutely need to be sitting down." And I said, "What's up?" She said, "The FBI has come to your office. They battered down your back door and are taking all your records." I was charged with healthcare fraud. According to the laws as they are established, did I get money I was not entitled to? Yes. Did I have a system to identify and correct those errors? No. That's considered blind disregard. There's no such thing as an innocent mistake. So I'm passionate about being the last dentist who goes to prison for things they didn't know or understand.
Fraud charges and prison, the costly lesson every healthcare provider must learn. Dr. Bob D. interviews Dr. Roy Shelburne.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today with a special guest, Dr. Roy Shelburne. May I call you Roy?
Absolutely. If you'll let me call you Bob.
I'm Bob to everyone, including my patients. I heard about Roy from our friend, Dr. Nacho's Paul Goodman and his group, and I was intrigued by the story. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard about your story, and you're on the speaking and coaching circuit, apparently. And I wanted you to take a couple of minutes, introduce yourself, and I want to just have a conversation. As questions come up, I'm going to ask you, but I want you to tell me your story, what you have to offer my listeners and my audience and my platform. Go ahead, Roy. Floor is yours.
For those who don't know me, I'm a dentist, a father, a grandfather, a practice owner, but I am also a convicted felon. I doubt you've heard a CV like that very often. I graduated from dental school in 1981. I was born and raised in the westernmost part of Virginia. I'm actually west of West Virginia. Set up my practice in my grandfather's hardware store building and practiced there with a big grin on my face for 27 years. I had flown to the American Dental Association meeting in 2003. It was in San Francisco, California. Keynote speaker was Rudolph Giuliani, 2 years after 9/11. Listening to his keynote, my phone began to vibrate, and I didn't notice it, but the guy next to me did, elbowed me, said, "I think your phone's vibrating." And it identified my wife who was calling, and she was at Virginia Tech with my daughter. She wasn't home, and she knew I was in this meeting and typically would not interrupt. So I thought it was a mistake. So closed my phone. Everybody was leaving the auditorium in the Omni in San Francisco. And I called my wife, and she opened by saying, "Are you sitting down?" Have you ever had a phone call like that where you knew what was next was not going to be good? This is one of those calls. I said, "Do I need to be sitting down, Debbie?" And she said, "You absolutely need to be sitting down." And I said, "What's up?" She said, "James called." James was our custodian at the office. James called to let me know the FBI has come to your office. They've battered down your back door and are taking all your records. And by the way, my practice was set up in my grandfather's hardware store building. I had a family background in that area for 5 generations. I said, are you sure? And she said, "Yeah, he sent pictures." So I talked to her for a couple of minutes, trying to reassure her that things were going to be okay, knowing that they probably weren't. And it was Friday, didn't expect anybody to be in my office. But I thought I'd call anyway. And after 4 rings, somebody picked up the phone and went, "Hello." I said, "Hello, who is this?" And they asked, "Who's this?" And I said, "I'm Dr. Shelburne. I own the office you're in and the phone you're talking on. What's going on?" And the individual introduced himself as an FBI agent and explained that I was a target of a healthcare fraud investigation. Was investigated over the course of the next 3 years. The area was very poor. 95% of the patients under 18 had Medicaid. And those were my neighbors. Those were the children of my friends. And I thought it was important that I provide care to them. So we had a busy Medicaid practice. The investigation covered the course of 6.5 years. And over the 6.5 years, I was paid $3.5 million for the services I provided for my patients, which is significant. I was charged, went to trial, and was found guilty on all charges. It was a jury trial. The jury never is made aware of the amount, only they determine the guilt or innocence. So during sentencing, the government determines with the court how much you got that you weren't entitled to. And $3.5 million is a large amount. But during sentencing, the government established of the $3.5 million I received that I was during the period, the amount that I got that I wasn't entitled to was $17,899.57, which is 0.01% of the amount I collected, which I thought was a pretty good error percentage. The government did not. So I went to prison for 24 months for $17,899.57. And we did make errors. We did get paid amounts that we weren't entitled to that amounted to the $17,000. But we also went over the same 6.5-year period and established treatment that I did provide should have been billed for, could have been paid for. And that amount was about $30,000, but that made no difference. So I'm passionate about being the last dentist who goes to prison for things they didn't know or understand. And the thing, I guess, most importantly, that I want to convey to the listeners, the viewers, is that when you intent to defraud includes, of course, if you billed for a service you never did on a patient you never saw, that's intent to defraud. But what I didn't understand is it also includes what's called blind disregard, which means if you continue to make the same mistakes and not have a system to identify and correct those mistakes, that's considered blind disregard. So there's no such thing as an innocent mistake. So I talk about documentation to support the fact that the work you did was actually done and that it was billed appropriately, as well as the billing and coding piece, because even if the dentist knows nothing about the billing coding piece, about the insurance component of the practice, you're still held responsible because your name is on the claim form as the provider of service and you are paid. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Your message is great. Documentation, sticking to your ethics, and figuring out what is right and what is not is something that every dentist should think about. There's no one out there that knows how we live, right? The pressures of running a business, being a healthcare provider, dealing with staff, dealing with family, always saying we're not there for them. So there are a lot of pressures out there. But when you talk about jail, that's going to get a lot of attention, okay? Yeah. If the other side who convicted you was here, would say, no, we were right to put you in jail.
I don't push against that. According to the laws as they are established, did I get money I was not entitled to? Yes. Did I have a system to identify and correct those errors? No. So by the letter of the law, I was convicted and I can't say that it was wrong. Under the laws that exist today, if somebody says you got convicted and it was appropriate, I got to say the way the laws work in today's world, they're absolutely right. I won't come against that.
Interesting. So you are taking responsibility, but what I'm trying to figure out here, the punishment did not fit the crime.
You have no idea. I was charged with healthcare fraud, and they brought 118 instances that could have been construed as healthcare fraud. There was one count of healthcare fraud, so they could have found me guilty on one of the 118. I was also charged with racketeering and money laundering and structuring. So racketeering and money laundering were established to punish organized crime. However, it is applicable in our situation because there are a group of individuals in a dental practice who work together to submit claims. And if you receive money you're not entitled to, technically everybody could be held responsible. And there have been actions similar to mine that have also named team members. And actually, there's this instance where a doctor didn't own their practice, but rotated through the different practices in a particular area. And they also named the doctors who provided space for this doctor to practice. So can they get the horse they rode on? Absolutely. Because I was charged with racketeering and money laundering, when I went to sentencing, the sentencing report establishes the amount that you are looking at to go to prison. It establishes the minimum and maximum amount you'll be sentenced to. And because I was found guilty on all the charges, minimum amount I was going to serve in prison was 15 years, which is not a short amount of time. I'm an older man. That would probably be a life sentence. But there were a lot of providential things that actually happened in my life and during the process. The Supreme Court actually defined a single word in the money laundering statute. And of the 7 things that I was convicted of, 5 of them were money laundering. So, for example, if you get money you're not entitled to, you put it in a legitimate account for your practice, and then you start paying legitimate expenses for your practice. You've laundered dirty money that you've received for clean money. So if you send a check, that's one way. If you send a credit card, that's another way. If you pay by cash, that's another way. If you send it by mail, that's another way. And the Supreme Court, 6 days before I was to be sentenced, 6 days, defined a single word in the money laundering statutes. And my attorney read their definition of the word and said, I think the way they defined that word, it makes it so it doesn't apply in my case. So my attorney wrote a motion to the judge asking the judge to set aside the 5 money laundering convictions based on the Supreme Court decision. And going into sentencing, like I said, we didn't know how the judge was going to rule. So he did agree with the attorney's argument that the money laundering convictions were no longer applicable based on the Supreme Court decision 6 days before I was to be sentenced. So he pulled out the 5 money laundering convictions, and it reduced the minimum amount that I would be sentenced to from 15 years to 47 months. And in the federal system, for the judge to divert from that minimum or maximum, they have to establish the reason for that. So the judge actually sentenced me to 24 months, which is almost half the 47 months. And in his justification for that reduction, he said, in his opinion, it could have gone either way. So that's considered reasonable doubt. So he actually reduced it from 47 months to 24 months. A lot of providential things happened in my life, and that's one of those things that did. 24 months is much better than 47 and a whole lot better than 15 years.
Yes. Yeah, questions are coming up. So many questions are coming up, right? I want to hit you with them. First of all, when did this happen, and when were you released?
So the search and seizure, 2003, arrest, 2006. And when I was arrested, because I was charged with racketeering and money laundering, it allowed the government to confiscate everything I owned. So when I was arrested, standing in the kitchen, had handcuffs on, a chain around my waist, attached the handcuffs, leg irons on, so that when I walked, I had to shuffle. There were 4 vehicles, 8 officers. I guess they thought I was going to run or try to take the Custer's last stand. But they pulled all the vehicles out of the garage onto the flatbeds. I was being read my rights. The phone began to ring. My wife was on my right shoulder. She turned to answer the telephone. And the officer stopped her, said, Miss Shelburne, we can't let anything interrupt this proceeding. So she turned back around, hand on the shoulder, phone picked up, answering machine. It was my daughter, who was at the University of Virginia at the time. And through her tears, we understood her say, Mom, Dad, they're here. They're taking my car. I don't need my car. Are you guys okay? So they also confiscated my children's cars. Their cars were in their name. My wife's car was in their name. Left her with no vehicle in the garage at all, and took my kids' vehicles as well. Confiscated the rights to all our bank accounts, tried to hire an attorney and expert witnesses with nothing. It's an uphill climb. So I don't think that answered your question. Do you want to pose that again? Okay.
Yes. So when you were arrested 2006 and you came...
No, I arrested in 2006, was then charged. The trial was in 2008. It was 9 days. And we supplied the 118 instances. We were prepared for that. The first 2.5 days consisted of our lavish lifestyle. And the jury never made aware of the amount that we got that we weren't entitled to. So they're just looking at this rich doctor. They showed how our houses, our vehicles, the vacations we went on, which made it look like I was a rich, greedy dentist. And did we have a good life? We absolutely did. It was wonderful. And the jury's looking at this and going, he's getting rich on my tax money that goes to support these Medicaid patients. They're never made aware of the amount. So I can see where they would see that. But it's then, as far as timeline, I was found guilty. The trial was 2008, found guilty on all charges, reduced because of the money laundering things that was out. I was actually released from prison in May of 2010. My license was revoked as a result of the conviction. I actually surrendered it voluntarily prior to, because I knew it was going to be revoked as a result of the conviction. In Virginia, the minimum period of revocation is 3 years. I was able to reapply for my license in 2011. And it took a meeting of the whole board to act on my license. They met on December 1st of 2011, and they determined my license should be reinstated. Interestingly enough, I was active with the Virginia Association, and I got my dues renewal while I was in prison in 2008. I obviously couldn't afford it, and I wrote a letter back to the Virginia Dental Association, and Terry Dickinson, who was the director at that time, wrote a great letter back and said, if and until you're able to be able to support yourself, we will keep your license active.
Let's take a quick break to talk about All Practice Solutions, a privately owned equipment dealer out of Chicago serving dentists nationwide. They offer top-tier service without the corporate markup, helping private practice dentists stay independent. Right now, Mention DIG Podcast and get $500 off CBCTs, $250 off chairs, compressors, and vacuums, and $100 off handheld X-ray generators and sensors. Whether you're upgrading or expanding, check them out at allpracticesolutions.com and get real support from real people.
So I remained an American Dental Association member while I was in prison for the 3.5-year period until I was able to repay it. So the board did reinstate my license, and I've worked as a locum tenens since then. Affected my children drastically. While during the investigation, 3 teams of officers went to my 3 children's universities, got their schedule from the bursar's office, and enlisted help of campus police to direct them to the classroom in the area my kids were going to be in. So they interrupted their classes. They flashed the FBI insignia, pulled my kids out of their classes, brought them into an empty classroom, and interrogated them anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. As a parent, what do you think that did to me? It tore me up. It made me mad. I asked them to come home, and I told them, I said, I'm going to plead guilty because I can't stand to see this happen. And they were, no, we're fine. And I said, the deal is if I see anything that would suggest you're not being able to accomplish what you're capable of and being productive individuals, I'll pull that trigger because I can't stand to watch it. And the way that ended up, I have my son who is a dentist. He graduated in May of 2008 when I surrendered my license in August. I have a pediatrician, and I have a doctor of audiology. You asked where I am and how I'm able to be positive about it. It was a horrible thing that happened, but I learned an important lesson about what's important in life. And my wife and I have celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary. While I was in prison, she came to visit every single weekend. Divorce is not something we would ever consider. Murder's not out of the question. So if you read my obituary, she's decided to kill me. But yeah, I've been given a new passion. As I said before, I'm passionate about being the last dental professional who goes to prison for things they didn't know or understand. Do I have a good life? I do.
Yeah, Roy, and I really appreciate your forthcoming, and the fact that what I want people listening to this story, not to just listen to the story, but look and see how Roy's dealing with adversity. In other words, we have a lot of doctors who think that their life is not as good as other people posting on Instagram. I call them the Instagram crowd. But look and see what Roy has faced and come out victoriously, in my opinion, not money-wise, not practice-wise, but family-wise. You guys are probably closer than ever, and you have something that you can cherish. And adversity can make us stronger and can make us leaders and can make us affect other people's lives. And that's what you're trying to do.
No, I tell people doors open and close in our lives. We need to embrace that. There are so many people, when a door closes in front of you, you spend so much time staring at that door, wishing it would reopen, and you miss the door that actually opens for you. A bend in the road is only the end of the road if you fail to make the turn. Life gives you sometimes lemons. Make lemonade as much as you possibly can. And you're right in terms of moaning and complaining about the patient that canceled their appointment or the team member that leaves or whatever that issue is. Could things be worse? Yes. Ultimately, dentistry is one of the most incredible professions in the world. And shifting a little bit, a lot of people say that, aren't you mad at the government? I don't believe I trust the government, but I live in a country where I was able to go from being a convicted felon to be where I am today, and there's no other country in the world where that would be possible. So I am incredibly proud of my being here in America, because other places in the world it would have not happened. So I am a proud American.
People who know me know that I criticize the American Dental Association, but I'm always an advocate for being a member of the American Dental Association, because the government is not going to go to Roy or Bob D and asking our questions about something that related to dentistry. They're going to listen to them. And if we're not involved, somebody else is making that decision. The days that you write a check and you say, hey, I'm a member, is over. You need to speak up. There are people that are working against us, and we need to do that. I have this gentleman, this doc that I'm sure, Stephen Motner, a name called Marty. He takes every insurance in the world, and he tells everybody, oh, I won't take Medicaid. With insurance, you make a mistake that you get a slap on the hand. Medicaid, you make a mistake, you go to jail. I'm sure he's referring to you because he's an avid reader of all the stories, and I'm sure he's read your story. What do you recommend people do?
So your suggestion is faulty in that insurance companies will not come after you. They will, but the money needs to make sense. So they're not going to come after you for $17,899.57. But if you're that doctor who takes every plan, have a hard time making payroll, they do a little bit funky things on the billing, I can tell you that the insurance companies were the first to employ AI. They know exactly what your submissions are, and they develop a bell curve of averages, and Dr. Average in the middle. Are they going to come after you? More than likely not. But if you're two standard deviations from what's considered normal and the money looks pretty significant, they'll come after you. Will they take action? And yes, they will. It's rare. As far as the Medicare, Medicaid, the government, they're not so concerned about the money. They're concerned about sending a message. They want everybody to know what's going to happen in the event that you don't toe the line. Bottom line, there's no difference between if you're taking regular insurance, if you're taking Medicaid, you need the same foundation of documentation to support everything that you do. Number two, your billing and coding should meet what's considered normal, and you need to have a system to identify any errors that you make and make corrections so that you are hoping to be excellent in what you do. You can't be perfect. But if you are reviewing, doing audits in your practice to make sure that the documentation meets requirement and the billing and coding is appropriate, and taking the appropriate action once you identify errors, that takes the blind disregard off the paper, and you will, number one, increase your reimbursement because the person who's doing the billing for you has all the information they need to submit a clean claim for maximum reimbursement. It will protect and defend you not only with the insurance companies, but with malpractice. The documentation is the foundation for the protection of your practice, period. And with patient care or any other aspect of your practice. And number three, review appropriately and take the action necessary. And if you do, I lecture and I tell you, I'm not your normal person. A lot of lecturers will say, I don't want to scare you. I want to terrify you. But I also want to give you the tools you need to be able to implement in your practice so you don't have to be afraid. If you do that, you will be protected. And that's with regular insurance, if you submit a claim to them, or if that's Medicare, Medicaid, same difference. The same requirement, the same expectations. The only difference is the size of the stick they're going to hit you with. I always thought if I got money I was entitled to, I could return it with any interest or penalties. Best offer I ever got to settle in my instance was 3 years in prison and a restitution of $300,000. So that's the best offer I ever got before going to trial. And that's the reason why I went to trial. I thought that was ridiculous. And in most cases, if you go to trial, you're in much hotter water. And my attorney said, I've never seen anybody who went to trial, was found guilty, and the penalties that you were assessed and the time in jail, that it was less than what they offered prior to. He said, I've never seen this. I've read a lot. I've never seen that happen either. So I'm an anomaly on a lot of levels.
Yeah, thank God. And enough people that I respect know you that have told me before this interview what a good person you are and how you're trying to help people. Roy, how much money did you spend on that attorney fees of defending this? This is like a 7-year ordeal, right? 8-year ordeal.
400,000.
Yeah. It's just a learning lesson. I'm not going to say a shame or not, but it was a 2-year residency, right? 2-year residency.
I tell people I share for $17,899.57. How much did you as a taxpayer pay to have me investigated, to have the trial move forward, and to incarcerate me? And that's probably about $1.3 million for $17,899.57. And I'd ask you where the fraud is, but that's just me. I'm just maybe out there on the fringes.
Yeah. But when you deal with the government, these instances are plenty, right?
It happens with greater frequency than anybody would believe. I get calls all the time from people who are going through the process and they need some help and support and reinforcement. And I try as much as possible to help them understand what's going to happen, and hopefully that they're going to find a resolution as good as mine. Because in most cases, if you're charged, you're going to be found guilty. It's 96% of people who are charged and go to trial are found guilty. So the chances of being found innocent are almost nil.
Is this happening a lot today?
It depends on your definition of a lot. There were 26 dentists who were charged last year, I believe.
Wow. Roy, how can people get a hold of you? Tell me about what you do now. I know you speak, and after we stop recording, I'm going to solicit you to come and speak for me.
Oh, good. So as far as easiest way to get in touch with me is you can website, and it's royshelburne.com. So it's simple. In terms of email, it's royshelburne@gmail. And in terms of speaking, I love to be able to share my story. And I've got, as far as content, I've probably got 12 hours. I guess I can do a CE altogether. Love to be able to speak, love to be able to interact with audiences, love questions, because if I get a question that I'm not aware of, it helps me to learn and to be able to address that moving forward. As far as consulting, I help offices with their documentation, with their billing and coding, and with their audit systems in the practice. So that's a service I provide. My goal, a lot of people who provide consulting services, they want long-term contracts and continue with the practice. My goal is to get you set up so you're self-directed. So I want to put myself out of business. So that's my goal when I do my consulting, to make sure that I'm in, get things established, and then walk away, and I can do reviews afterward. But all that's things that I provide.
Because I do have sponsors in my other interviews, I want everybody to know that Roy and I do not have any financial arrangements. This is just for informative reasons, and I want people to be able to contact you, and people can get a hold of you. My recommendation to you is, if you have chosen to accept a lot of insurances and Medicaid plans, you need someone like Roy to give you some guidance on how to operate so you don't get yourself in trouble. It could be mistakes that can end you up in jail. Do you have anything to say at the end so we can close this up?
I just appreciate being able to, you're great about asking the questions that people are afraid to, just like the one who would say that you were convicted inappropriately. That's stepping out there and being brave. My dad always used to say, it's better to keep your mouth shut and let everybody just think you're stupid than open your mouth and remove all doubt. Thank you for allowing me to open my mouth and at least share my side of the story. Thank you. I appreciate you're providing a great service. Thank you for being brave enough to ask a convicted felon to be part of your network.
For us, you're a colleague, and you always will be a colleague. Our country was based on second chances, and I like you.
No, thanks. Likewise.
Great. Thank you very much for being here.
That's a wrap for today's episode. If you're in the market for reliable dental equipment from a company that truly cares, check out All Practice Solutions. And don't forget, mention DIG Podcast for exclusive savings. $500 off CBCTs, $250 off chairs, compressors, vacuums, and $100 off X-ray generators and sensors. Visit allpracticesolutions.com today.
This has been a production of Dentistry in General Radio Network. Visit our website, dentistryingeneral.com, to join engaging clinical and business conversations. Explore our dental podcasts. Stay updated